In the last episode, Sisko, Bashir and Dax did a teleporter oopsie and travelled back in time to 2024. The lads ended up in a sanctuary district, which is basically a nice way of saying concentration camp for poor people. Dax, on the other hand, got lucky and ended up outside with someone rich. It's an important time in history, as something called the Bell Riots are about to kick off in the Sanctuary District and, in so doing, usher in societal progress. That progress becomes somewhat less likely when Gabriel Bell, after whom the riots were named when he protected some hostages, ends up getting stabbed trying to defend Sisko and Bashir. Feels a bit rude to name the riots after him when he was the good guy, but that's history for you. Anywho, him being dead means the whole human race goes down the shitter, something noted by Kira and company in orbit around a now very quiet Earth back in the 24th century. The good news is that Sisko understands how big of a balls-up they've caused, which is why he's getting himself involved in the riots and subsequent hostage situation and telling people that his name is Gabriel Bell. Of course, history records Bell as having died when the military were sent in, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Let's rejoin them as Kid Douchebag, the guy who took the hostages in the first place, lives up to his name. Kid Douchebag is enjoying things a bit too much, and Sisko intervenes to make sure he understands that a dead hostage is worth nothing. Vin, one of the guards who brought Sisko and Bashir in, isn't helping on that score. Him pulling a pistol out of his arse nearly starts a shooting match until Sisko jumps on him and prevents it. At least Kid Douchebag seems to understand that now would be a bad time to start pulling triggers, as they're currently on the news. It's not quite the demonstration they were planning, but it'll have to do, which might be why Knife Dad, who was originally trying to organise something more peaceful, turns up to join them. A few people with less volatile tendencies might be useful in keeping the hostages alive, so Sisko sends him off to grab some. That's prudent, as help from outside isn't going to arrive anytime soon. Dax and Chris are watching the same news reports. She wants to get in there, though Chris says that isn't going to be possible. The only alternative help is the crew of the Defiant, but they're struggling too. Kira and O'Brien take their first shot at finding the right time zone, and overshoot by about 100 years. It's all down to Sisko and Bashir then, which is why the former is trying to calm things down by getting Knife Dad to be their representative. Kid Douchebag doesn't like it, his original plan being money and a ticket out of here rather than letting the public know about this place, but even he has to admit that a middle-aged family man is more difficult for people to ignore than he is. The attempt to get their story out lasts for exactly 20 seconds before somebody cuts the transmission. Vin starts antagonizing Kid Douchebag again and very nearly gets his head cracked as a result. The argument over whether to kill him is interrupted by a call from outside. Her name is Detective Preston, and she says she's responsible for cutting the transmission. She wants to talk, though not to Kid Douchebag after he makes some threats. Knife Dad seems more reasonable, which is why she offers to meet him at the district gate to discuss things in person, and Knife Dad decides bringing Sisko too might be a good plan. Detective Preston does all the things a hostage negotiator has to do, which basically amounts to making no firm agreements whilst sounding like everything is possible. To be fair, she's got a pretty good excuse for needing to go and ask other people, as wanting every sanctuary district in the country closed down is something that's a wee bit above her pay grade. There won't be any hostages to negotiate over if Vin keeps on with his shit. An attempt to scarper ends in Sisko having to point a gun at Kid Douchebag and Knife Dad stepping in to defuse things. Sisko has a shout at Vin to try and prevent further nonsense, and maybe even gets through to him. Speaking of nonsense, Kira and O'Brien are having another go at time travel. They hit the 60s this time and are met by a pair of hippies, so naturally, they teleport away in front of them. I suppose it's better than the trope of a drunk who looks at his bottle after witnessing something weird. Back in the riot, Detective Preston has managed to sort out breakfast for everybody. It's amazing what's possible when people fight back. Knife Dad's kid is here too, presumably feeling better after the beating that Bashir checked him over for. Family is very much the topic, and Vin's mate wants to get back to his. A photo shown to Bashir is an attempt to elicit sympathy, which is pretty ballsy considering how many families their dad brought in at gunpoint. At least the clerk is now of the opinion that she wants this place closed down, so that's progress, I guess. Sadly, those further up the chain do not agree. Detective Preston has returned to tell us the governor has decided we can all go fuck ourselves. It's phrased slightly more diplomatically, but boils down to the same we'll look at it response that politicians give when they have no personal investment in changing things. The decision is accompanied by Preston implying that other action may be taken to end the standoff, which might be what prompts Knife Dad to respond with a threat to the hostages. So much for the family man image, even if it was a bluff. Dax has decided she's tired of waiting. If she chose to enter the sanctuary through the sewer to avoid detection, she's going to be disappointed. A resident appears from a doorway and follows her. Sisko and Bashir are trying, and failing, to fiddle with a computer. Sisko's history lessons told him that the residents here used it to tell their side of the story, but they're struggling to make it work. All of which is forgotten when Kid Douchebag announces that some residents have brought in a newcomer. Dax and Bashir greet each other, and the latter has the good sense to reintroduce Sisko to her as Gabriel Bell. Knife Dad asks the obvious question of how she got in, the answer apparently involving her ID being fiddled to let her through the locks in the sewer, just in case the viewer was wondering why nobody escaped that way. Time to bring her up to speed with events inside the Sanctuary District and explain that because of the unexpected corpsification of the real Gabriel Bell, Sisko has to stay here and do the job himself. There's an additional wrinkle now too, though. Dax's comm badge is gone, having been taken by one of the lads who brought her in. If a rescue attempt somehow manages to get here, calling the badge only to find that they're talking to some ancient earthling isn't going to help anyone. Sisko sends Bashir off with Dax to track down who took her badge, while he carries on trying to make a transmission here. That last little nugget is something Dax says she might have a solution for. In fact, she knows just the guy. Finding the comm badge isn't as difficult as you'd expect. The group who found her and took her badge went to a building before escorting her to us. We find a lad inside who's holding the badge and tells us that it's to protect him from aliens. Dax explaining that she's actually an alien herself, one here to protect Earth, convinces him that our need is greater than his, and he hands it over without any issue. Tangentially, the character is played by Clint Howard, and he's another bit of Star Trek royalty. He was in the original series as the rather unfortunately named Balok, and subsequently appeared in Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, Discovery, and Strange New Worlds, making him currently the longest-serving Trek actor. Anywho, a newly rebadged Dax arranges to meet Bashir and Sisko where they first woke up here, and descends back into the sewers. She reappears in Chris's office, presumably smelling of shit. He doesn't seem to mind, though that may be due to her asking him to commit multiple crimes. Chris, you will recall, owns a communications company, and Dax wants him to hand access over to the residents of the Sanctuary District. Letting the public know how much they have in common with these people, that they're only a lost job away from joining them, will do much to change minds. Chris agrees, and a procession of residents tell their tales to anybody who'll listen. Somebody who isn't listening is the governor. He's decided to ignore Detective Preston's advice of further negotiation and take a military approach instead. Fair play to her for trying, at least. And speaking of trying, Kira and O'Brien have just visited 2048. The place is, to be polite, a complete shithole. Whatever didn't happen in 2024 resulted in some very unpleasant consequences indeed. That leaves them with only enough science bollocks for a single last attempt. That last roll of the dice wins the money, and they manage to contact Dax. They set up the teleporter to automatically return them after a minute, so when Dax says that she'll meet them to explain, Kira tells her she'll need to turn off her comm badge to prevent it from happening. Just as well that they set things up to automatically try again later, though I imagine whoever stole comm badges from Sisko and Bashir have just had a very interesting experience indeed. Sisko has one benefit that Gabriel Bell didn't. He knows what's coming. When Kid Douchebag tells him he's seen a build-up of National Guard units from the roof, he knows it's time to get the hostages somewhere safe and adds Bashir to make sure. It's also time for Knife Dad to send his kid away before things go pear-shaped, and Kid Douchebag gives him his hat as he leaves. Maybe he's figured it out too. The violence is as swift as it is bloody. The military fires first, so Kid Douchebag finally getting to use that shotgun feels fair to me. He doesn't get to use it twice though, and Knife Dad goes down too. It's Vin who tries to stop things in the end. Sisko manages to move in front of him when Vin gets a gun pointed at him and takes the bullet himself. Vin calling the shooter all kinds of arsehole is sufficient to prove that he's one of the hostages, and the military bugger off to shoot some other people after giving Vin and his mate their guns back. Bashir's out to tend Sisko's wound and informs us all that he'll live, which is more than can be said for Knife Dad, who will henceforth be known as Knife Dead. A walk in the morning shows violence wasn't restricted to the building. Vin's fully on board now, his near-death experience from the rescue team perhaps being the clincher. He's even going to let Sisko and Bashir go, saying that he'll plant their IDs on some corpses. Quite how that will work when the name Bell is going to become famous isn't explained, but maybe he'll choose ones that are unrecognisable. He also says he's going to be very vocal in how things went down here, and how it could all have been avoided. We're back on the Defiant, their return teleport presumably being a success. 24th century medicine is helping sort out that gunshot wound nicely, though the damage to the timeline might be more difficult to explain away when the now reappeared Starfleet Command learn about all this and give him a bollocking. Still, it's better than the alternative, so we'll leave them to debate the ignorant stupidity of 21st century humans, something far more prescient than the writers had anticipated, until the next adventure. And so the members of Starfleet once more cast their detritus into timelines past, only for it to all turn out fine in the end. This timey-wimey stuff is far more resilient than the Temporal Integrity Commission gives it credit. Poor Captain Braxton went through all of it for nothing. Trek has a habit of making human advancement be tied to bloody awful things. The advent of warp travel itself is tied to our species recovering from a nuclear holocaust, albeit one that keeps changing years as the franchise outlives expectations. Having one of our species' most difficult lessons be tied to a massacre, then, is entirely appropriate. The attitude that allows such things to happen is perhaps best described by an exchange between Bashir and the clerk. It's not your fault that things are the way they are. Everybody tells themselves that, and nothing ever changes. Ignorance is bliss, and a big wall can make you very ignorant indeed, until you wake up one day and realise that you're trapped on the other side of it, that is. If there's a negative to be levelled here, it's perhaps the potential implications of Sisko taking charge of saving the future. I'm probably overthinking it, but I can see some people looking at that and taking away the lesson that others will swoop in and save them from themselves, missing the point that somebody else had to do it in the first place for him to exist. A man from the future who already knows how pleasant Earth and humanity can become isn't really gambling anything by betting on it. He already knows the result. The real hero was the Gabriel Bell who died, and now he doesn't even get his face in the history books. We really fucked that guy over, didn't we? The most pondering I got from this one, though, was from an unexpected source. Kid Douchebag. I understand that he's supposed to be the embodiment of humanity driven to its limit, the personification of an argument I myself have been levelling regularly at Starfleet morals. I understand that he's meant to be a sort of proto-Captain Shouty from the Equinox, a man doing what he must to survive in a hostile environment. I understand that his performative cruelty is likely meant to represent the attitude of targeting others so that you yourself are not targeted in turn. The thing is, I still think he's a cock. Maybe that's the point, though. Maybe he serves a better lesson that way, to show that somebody can be a cock and still do the right thing when the goal is sufficiently lofty. Maybe that's his coping mechanism, or all that he remembers how to be after the rest of the world left him to rot. Maybe the point is that his willingness to grow should matter more to us than his etiquette while he does it. We'll end with the reception for this story, shall we? Because it's something I think carries a lesson worth repeating. When this story was broadcast, a small but loud portion of the audience called it too preachy, too left-wing, too political. If that sounds familiar, it's because we've heard it recently from the vocal chuds who said similar things of Discovery and Picard and Strange New Worlds. It's also worth mentioning that the original series received threats from TV stations in southern states of America saying they would refuse to broadcast it because a black woman worked on the bridge. Trek has always been these things. It has always looked at the next step of societal advancement. It has always been progressive in ways that offend the worst kinds of people for the period in which it was released, at least as far as network executives would allow it to be, anyway. The only thing that's changed is the name that right-wing grifters have applied to it when trying to dismiss the message. Anybody who tells you otherwise either hasn't understood the source material or is choosing to be willfully ignorant of it. End of episode.
I've tracked the computer this Mr. Morden used to send the message.
Okay. Are you going to tell us then, or...?
Oh, sorry. These conversations usually involve you asking.
Fine. What did you find out?
Not a lot.
Well, that was worth the wait.
I didn't say it was nothing.
Do you want me to bite you?
Maybe later. All right. Jesus. It came from one of the terminals in Quarks, meaning anybody could have used it.
So, what does that get us?
Nothing.
You literally just said it wasn't nothing.
I was trying to let you down gently.
Oh, fuck my life. Woof.